Hello, my name is Parton Dim and my partner is Jamie Patterson. For our class observation, it's about walking dictation activity. It's 26-minute long. For the information, orientation informations, according to the YouTube, the date of observation was posted on October 14, 2016, and the locations was at Open Door Learning Center, Arlington Hills. The observation core was adult ESL walking dictation activity, and this course was for level 4 adult ESL class, and their instruction was Paul Weiser, and the number of students it was roughly 18 students because it's hard to see all of the students, but as you guys watch the video you'll be able to see. Saw two males and the rest were females. So this was a group of mixed language learner, Latino, Asian of students are presenting in the classroom. And for the topic of the lesson, it was about communicating a sentence to another English learner who writes it down to as they hear it orally. So for the classroom layout and sitting charge, as you can see, the navy dark blue color is the center of the classroom, and you can see the black diamonds are representing students and the red diamonds represent the instructor. On the edges are the classroom materials, the door, the window, the desk, the teacher desk. So what we can see on here, there's are more students in this class less than what represented on the diagram, but we cannot see them due to the camera positions. It should be a note that this is the layout of the classroom in the beginning of the class, but as they participate in the activity, the students and the teacher position do change. So the first part, so as a teacher, Mr. Weiser began to introducing the learning objective to the students. We saw that he was using hand gesture to demonstrate his word. And he also asked volunteer to model to understand what they're doing for the day or for the activity. So him and the volunteer, they also do activity together to show the students and the learner what to do. So next one, slide please. So in this section, what happened was the teacher, Mr. Weiser, asked students to be in a group of two, which is one part, two pair. He gave them two pairs of groups, two student. So one of them to be a walker and the other to be a rider. So at the end, they switch their position. So what writer do is first the reader or the walker have to go read a certain sentence outdoor or on the wall or by outdoor, and remember it in their head and then tell and able to tell the writer to write it down. So the writer goal was to able to write what the walker said, and that was the activity for this part.
So the first element that we focused on in this video was comprehensive input. So simply put, comprehensible input is the hypothesis that we acquire language only when we understand the message. So one way to help students understand the message is through the speech that we incorporate at their proficiency level. Mr. Weiser displays this through using a slower rate of speech. He is sure to enunciate every word. The reason he does this is because a brisk speaking pace is often difficult to follow for English learners. He also simplifies his sentence structures. So instead of giving an elaborate description of going out into the hallway and reading your sentence and then memorizing it, he simply says that you will read your sentence and put it into your head. When he models the activity with his student volunteer, he models the questions that he wants his students to be asking during this. So he might ask questions like, can you repeat? Can you explain? In order to model that language that the students are expected to use. Another feature of comprehensive input is a clear explanation of academic tasks. So Mr. Weiser does this through gestures and visual aids. There's a list of questions on the wall that they can use to help them in the project. So he locates them for them and makes sure they know where their visual tools are. Anytime he's talking about something happening outside of the classroom, he points to that thing, so that points out of the classroom to the door or the hallway, so they know that it is occurring outside. And the last thing he does is that he reviews the directions multiple times in slightly different ways each time to make sure everyone understands.
So the second element was push output. So according to Swing and Lipkin, noticing a problem pushed the learner to modify his or her output. So if the learner recognize that they have made mistake, they may be pushed into changing their answer or language. And also Swings and Lipkin also explain that in doing so, the learner may sometimes be forced into a more synthetic proceeding mode then occur in comprehension. So the thus output may be may set noticing and train triggering mental processes that led to modified output. So there are several ways that a learner might realize that they have made a mistake. One could be external factors such as feedback or request for clarification. The other could be internal factor. In our observation, we saw that realization significantly through external factors. So if after students have completed their sentence and written them on the board, they went over them as a whole class. So another way that push output could have been incorporated more would be having writers in their sentence out loud after they had written it so they could modify an output that doesn't sound right to them. And also if they another way could be like if the cameraman was more focused on a certain group so that we can hear what the students were discussing so that we can hear their conversation or their question to their partner, see what's going on between the two. So according to Swings and Lipkin, pushing a learner to modify their output result in acquisitions of the second type. That is acquisition as an increase in the ability to deploy existing grammatical knowledge more accurately. So if the students have read what they wrote out loud, they may have noticed their mistake through their existing grammatical knowledge. Professors often suggest reading your papers out loud because you may hear the mistake that you are seeing on the paper.
The final aspect is the negotiated interaction. We're operating here off of Michael Long's interaction hypothesis, which assumes that spoken interaction in which problems are being negotiated with one another promotes comprehension and production, which can facilitate language development. So in this context, the term interaction is used to specify interaction in which negotiation of meaning is involved. The need for negotiation occurs when either participants are trying to prevent a breakdown of communication or they're trying to repair communication that is already a breakdown of communication that has already occurred. We see two different examples of this in our video. The first is a student-student interaction and is used with the purpose to prevent a breakdown. So when the student who is reading the sentence is communicating with the student that is writing the sentence, they might ask questions like, do you understand me or do you follow me? The student who is writing down the sentence may ask questions like, is this what you mean? Can you explain that again? The second way we see negotiated interaction is to repair a communication breakdown that has already occurred. This is a teacher-student interaction. So at the end of the lesson, when Mr. Weiser and the students are evaluating all of the questions, they're working to repair mistakes that might have been made during the communication breakdown. So they work together to negotiate the meaning and use of the plural words that sometimes were not accurate and different punctuations.
For the specific analysis and reflective commentary on a single concept, we choose number 4, teacher questioning patterns. So according to Kamaravadevulu, the two type of questions that most commonly used in L2 development are displaced questions and referential question. So displaced question typically means predetermining answer already known by teacher like professor, while referential questions are more like open-ended and can contain new information for the students. So according to Long and Soto, research in L2 developed found that almost 79% of questions asked in the classroom were displaced question. In Mr. Watson's lesson, he asked a total of 42 questions. 21 of them was display questions, and the other 21 was a referential question.
So one pattern that we notice emerging in Mr. Weiser's display questions is that he will ask the question, the students would give a quick yes or no, and then he would repeat their answer yes or no and continue to elaborate further. Um, The need for elaboration in this context could either be that the display question he's asking is not getting the response that he's desiring from the students, or he's using this as an opportunity to repeat the directions for comprehension purposes. Of the 21 referential questions that he asked 9 knowledge questions and 12 comprehension questions. So his knowledge questions typically were asking students to define terms or orally recall instructions. And then when he was using the comprehension questions, he would ask things like, can you explain why you put the letter S after this word? When it came to the next 5 types of questions, he did not use any of these questions in his lesson plan whatsoever. So we came up with some suggestions for him. The first is for the application question. One of the sentences the students worked on is, I returned the shirt to get a bigger size. In this context, Mr. Weisers could ask, what would happen if we add an S to the end of the word shirt? What would stay the same and what would change? For the inference question, we can build on that last question, and Mr. Weiser could ask, what conclusions can you make if there were more than one shirt? How does this change the meaning of the sentence? With the analysis question, he could integrate this by asking students to analyze the relationship between sentence starters and the punctuation used at the end of the sentence. He had many opportunities to do something like this because there were a lot of sentences that were questions. He can focus on indicators like do you and can I, and ask students to analyze how these indicators affect the meaning and purpose of the sentence. When looking at synthesis questions, something that we thought would be a good idea is if Mr. Weiser asked his students to write new sentences using what they have learned from the lesson. When they compose their own sentences, they get additional practice with concepts of the lesson. They have to become cognitively engaged at a higher level in order to compose new material. And finally, for the evaluation question, we would suggest that Mr. Weiser encourage students in a group discussion after the activity. He can pose questions such as, what question did you find most helpful when you were trying to communicate with your partner? Students can then discuss with the class as they select, defend, and explain their answer through evaluating the experience of the activity. As Mr. Weiser implements some of these different types of questioning, it's important that he remembers to give students enough time to think about their answers. Rao explains that when teachers ask questions, they typically only give students a second before they expect a reply. And they also found that with an increased wait time of only 3 seconds or more, the replies that students gave were more the replies students gave were more logical and used language in a better way. This increased wait time also made teachers ask less questions, but the questions that they did ask were more cognitively demanding. When Mr. Wise asks questions, he expects a response immediately. The short question time, in addition to the display questions he uses and only using lower level referential questions, can lead to a lack of authentic conversation, which limits the English learners' learning opportunities and second language acquisition.
For the applications and summaries, overall, Mr. Weiser was able to implement the three important elements, which is comprehensible input, negotiate interactions, and push output. In this walking dictations activity, he also balanced a he also adds a balanced question amount of displays and referential questions to the students as well, but he relies too heavily on the lower level of referential question. So his question method are not strong enough to push EL students into the level of cognitive engagement that would help promote their language acquisitions and academic development and higher order thinking in in the critical thinking in the most effective way. So we believe some of his methods are such as comprehensive input and and well developed and effective, but overall all this lesson would be more beneficial with better teachers questioning teacher questioning. So after observing Mr. Weiser lesson, we have learned that the question that we ask matter. So just asking a lot of question does not mean that you are promoting learner. So our questioning should be more driven by purpose and internationally. So in the future, will look at the material objective and the language of the lessons and select a few meaningful questions ahead of times to promote discussions and cognitive engagement with our classes. And that's all about our presentation. And thank you for listening. Have a good
Thank
one.
you.